Ramen from scratch is my go-to meal whenever I want to impress. I promise, it's nothing like the instant stuff. Rich and packed with umami goodness, ramen from scratch will change the way you view instant noodles forever. In this video, I explore the 5 elements of ramen: broth, tare, toppings, noodles, and aromatic oil. Let me show you how to make it. Start by making the broth. I'm adding a whole chicken to a stock pot and filling it to cover the chicken with water. Simmer the broth over low heat for 3 hours. Afterwards, add the scraps of some daikon trimmings and let that simmer for another hour before adding a whole head of garlic, cleaned and chopped in half, a generous amount of sliced ginger, and the whites of 2 green onions. Continue to simmer for an additional 2 hours, then remove the bones and veggies. Save the meat and bones because you can use them for a second broth later. While the broth cools in the fridge, I'm going to make my tare. For tare, start by covering 28 grams of kombu, which is simply kelp, with water to hydrate for at least 30 minutes. Try to use as little water as possible here because we're aiming for a concentrated stock. You can add more if it soaks up too much. After soaking, heat the kombu on low until it reaches 76 degrees Celsius and hold that temperature for 5 minutes. Remove the kombu and add 21 grams of bonito flakes. Turn the temperature to medium-high and heat until it reaches 82 degrees Celsius. Then cut the heat and strain everything into a measuring cup. Use cheesecloth or paper towels to filter out particles, then squeeze out every last drop from the bonito. Once my dashi is cooled, I'm adding 61 grams of dark soy sauce, 61 grams of Maggi sauce, which isn't traditional, and 28 grams of sea salt, plus 28 grams of non-alcoholic mirin. This solution should be about 2.5% sodium, which is far too low for tare, but I'm using some of it as a brine for my toppings, and I'm going to add sea salt later until it reaches 10% sodium. Now it's time to prepare my toppings, starting with Ajitama, also known as ramen eggs, then pickled radish, and lechon. I'm not preparing chashu today because every ramen video on the internet already uses chashu. To start the ramen eggs, bring a pot of water to a boil. While the water comes to a boil, take 10 eggs and carefully poke a small hole in the bottom of each. You can do this with a thermometer tip, a push pin needle, or a corn skewer, but be careful not to push too hard as you may break the egg or accidentally hurt yourself. Poking a hole like this helps shape the final egg and prevents it from having a large air pocket in the bottom. If you don't feel confident, please skip this step as it's only for aesthetics, and make sure you don't get hurt over a step that won't even change the flavor of your dish. Your eggs may still end up with large air pockets if they're older because eggs are porous and as they age, water evaporates through the shell. Now that the eggs are prepared, I'm adding a tablespoon of baking soda to my boiling water. Many people suggest using vinegar as it weakens the shell. However, if you poke a hole in the eggs, vinegar actually strengthens the bond between the egg whites and the inner membrane, whereas baking soda weakens this bond by interfering with the disulfide bridges. As eggs get older, they become easier to peel, so if you have very old eggs, you may not even need to use any baking soda. Once the baking soda is dissolved, add the eggs carefully to the boiling water to prevent them from cracking against the bottom. For the first 60 to 90 seconds, stir the eggs gently in a circular motion to help center the yolks. Cook the eggs for 7 minutes for jammy yolks or 6 minutes for fully soft-boiled eggs. While the eggs cook, I'm going to pour some salt over ice and add it to my freezer. For now, I'm using this bowl because my large bowl doesn't fit into my freezer. Right before my eggs are done, I'm transferring the salted ice to a mixing bowl, followed by the coldest tap water possible. Now that the eggs are finished, remove them into the mixing bowl and stir constantly. Replace the water with cold tap water as soon as it starts to get warm. Once fully cooled, peel the eggs to the best of your ability. This can be difficult, but to help with the peeling process, I crack the shell along the equator, then remove the ends. How long to cook the eggs is really up to you, though I wouldn't recommend hard boiling as the egg brine will cause the yolks to firm up further and become tough and chewy. I honestly didn't hear my timer go off for some reason, so mine are a little firmer than I'd like. After peeling, I only damaged 1 egg, but I was hungry, so I ate a second one anyway. I'm adding them to a bag, then pouring over enough tare to submerge them, and topping with a paper towel. This is way too difficult, so I'm just going to add the paper towel to the bottom of my container, pour the eggs and tare in, and then top with another paper towel. Cover the bowl with plastic wrap and refrigerate for 2 to 3 days. My next topping is going to be crispy pork belly. So to start that, I'm taking 2 pieces of pork belly and scoring the meat deeply. Then I'll flip them over and score the skin and fat on a bias. Be careful not to cut too much here, as you could cause the pieces to fall apart. Cutting at a different angle helps to prevent this. Even if you do cut too deep, it won't align with the cuts you made on the other side. Generously coat the meat with MSG and salt. Refrigerate uncovered for at least 1 day. The next day, take a bunch of salt and mix it with water to make it clumpy. Once it's clumpy, spread it onto the fat side of the pork and cook in a 150 Celsius, 300 degree Fahrenheit oven for 20 to 30 minutes to dry out the skin. Remove from the oven and scrape off as much salt as possible. Now crank the heat to 220 Celsius or 450 Fahrenheit and bake for 20 to 30 minutes until the skin becomes extremely crispy. It should puff up like this. My third topping for this ramen is quick pickled daikon. To start this off, I'm going to trim my radish nicely into a square plank. Chop approximately in half and slice your radish in half one more time and slice into small planks like this. Add the daikon to a bowl, followed by salt and MSG to taste. Vinegar to nearly cover them. The daikon will let off enough moisture to finish covering, so now just refrigerate them covered overnight. With my toppings out of the way, let's move on to the noodles. Ramen noodles are made with something called kansui, which is an alkaline substance typically composed of sodium or potassium carbonate. Kansui gives ramen its distinct chew and iconic yellow color. The problem with kansui is that it can be tricky to find. My local ethnic grocery stores didn't have any, so I'm going to demonstrate how to make an at-home version with something I'm sure you all have in your pantry, baking soda. To make things easier on myself in the long run, I'm making a large batch today. Let's start by weighing out 168 grams of baking soda onto a parchment paper lined baking sheet. Spread the baking soda evenly, then transfer to the oven and bake for 60 minutes at 200 degrees Celsius, 400 Fahrenheit. While cooking, the baking soda breaks down into sodium carbonate, releasing carbon dioxide. After an hour, to ensure it's fully converted, I like to crank my oven to 250 Celsius. Once it reaches temperature, I hold it for about 15 minutes. You don't have to worry about overcooking this stuff because it's stable up to about 810 degrees Celsius. Now remove it from the oven and allow it to cool for an additional 15 minutes before sealing in a glass container. Label it and store in a cool, dry place. For safety, it's a good idea to do this in a well-ventilated kitchen, as baking soda releases carbon dioxide as it breaks down. Now that our sodium carbonate has cooled, let's weigh it out and determine if the reaction was complete. From 168 grams, we expect 106 grams or 1 mole of sodium carbonate. After weighing, I have 106 grams, which is a theoretical yield of 100%. However, it is possible that there is a lower yield and some of the baking soda just hasn't converted. Maybe next week I'll share some other uses for sodium carbonate. Anyway, now that our kansui is ready, let's make our noodles. To make noodles, use any high-protein flour. However, if you're using a high hydration dough, I recommend just sticking with all-purpose flour, as the protein can become overdeveloped. Using high-protein flour leads to a snappier texture. So let's start by weighing 500 grams of pizza flour, which is the highest protein flour I could find, with 5 grams of salt and 5 grams of sodium carbonate. 185 grams of water. Combine dry ingredients in a mixing bowl to start. Then slowly add water evenly over the flour and mix with chopsticks. Try to avoid adding too much water at once or into the same spot. Adding too much water at once unevenly hydrates the flour, which can make it a lot more difficult later. Once all the water is incorporated, go in with some gloved hands and rub the ramen dough to incorporate the water evenly. Once hydrated, rest in a plastic bag for about 30 minutes. After resting, take your rolling pin and flatten the dough into sheets about the thickness of the thickest setting on your pasta maker. Cut them widthwise to fit. Run through the pasta maker slowly, dialing down 1 notch each time. Once it's about the 3 notch on a 1 to 7 notch pasta maker, fold the ramen in half and reset the gauge to its thickest setting. Repeat the step 1 to 2 more times to get nicely laminated dough. After lamination, bring the dough down to the second thinnest setting. Next, run the dough through the pasta cutter attachment and immediately dust the noodles with corn or potato starch to prevent sticking. I like to make very long noodles here, but if you want shorter noodles, feel free to cut them to your desired length. Laminated dough creates a chewier and more uniform texture throughout the noodles by aligning the gluten lengthwise. The gluten will further develop after resting for 24 to 48 hours in the fridge. Some people swear by resting the noodles at room temperature, but sitting out for over 4 hours can potentially cause foodborne illness. Back to my broth. I skim off the fat and use that for my aromatic oil later, then melt it in a ramekin to help further separate the fat from the broth. Now that the rest of my ramen components are prepared, I'm going to make my aromatic oil by adding some neutral oil to my chicken fat and frying some white peppercorns till they begin to pop and smell fragrant. I'm also frying 2 bay leaves, which I'm adding about 30 seconds after the peppercorns. Once everything is nice and toasty, remove from the oil. Now I'm going in with some ginger medallions, which I'll fry until they're perfectly crispy and take out before they start to burn. I'm saving these ingredients to top my ramen with. Next, I'm going in with the greens of 2 scallions. These burn very easily, so be cautious and remove them when any color starts to form. I'm frying 4 large cloves of garlic, which I sliced into chips. Fry until they start to turn color and take them out. They should be lighter than you want because they'll finish browning while draining. Finally, I'm adding about 3 dried peppers to the oil for about a minute to infuse some spice. My camera died while I was building the bowl, so I'll take a moment to explain how to plate it. Start reheating enough broth for the bowls you plan to make. Don't let the broth boil, but reheat on medium. Cook the noodles in boiling water for about 90 seconds, then shake off all the extra moisture to prevent your broth from clouding. Start plating by adding your tare to the bottom of a warm bowl, followed by your noodles and broth to cover. Using chopsticks, align the noodles so that they're facing parallel to each other. You can do this by dragging them through the broth from left to right and folding them over themselves. Next, lay some chopped pork belly along the side of the bowl, skin facing up. Add fried garlic, ginger, and spring onions near the pork. On the other side, add some of those quick pickled radishes from earlier, then 1 Ajitama sliced in half lengthwise. Add a pinch of green onions to the middle of the bowl. Pour a tablespoon of aroma oil in the middle. Finally, fan out some seaweed along the back of the bowl. Now that's how you build an amazing Shoyu chintan ramen, sure to impress. The best part about cooking ramen at home is that once you master these 5 elements, you can take it however you want. There are no rules for ramen, so get creative and make some fantastic food. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more weekly videos. Bye for now.